My boss wrote a rulebook for everything, so I followed it like a machine. The first time Brent Caldwell corrected the way I stapled something, I thought it was a weird joke and waited for the smile. There wasn't one. He stood beside my desk like a museum guard, watching my hands and said, "Corner aligned? Always. If you can't control corners, you can't control outcomes." I work as an operations coordinator at a third-party logistics company, meaning I babysit shipments, drivers, angry clients, and the kind of spreadsheets that make your eyes feel sandy by noon. The office smells like burnt coffee and printer toner, and everyone keeps a spare hoodie because the AC swings between meat locker and swamp. Before Brent, my manager Letty ran things like an adult. Do your job, own your mistakes, don't make other people's lives harder. Then corporate realigned leadership and dropped Brent into our open plan bullpen with a standing desk, a color-coded water bottle, and the energy of a man who thinks personality is a distraction. On his second day, he called an all-hands and handed out a glossy booklet titled Caldwell Standards, Workflow Discipline, like we were joining a cult with better fonts. He made us sign a sheet that said we'd read it, then started flipping through it out loud, tapping the pages with a capped pen. "No hallway decisions," he said. "No quick questions at desks. All requests go through tickets. All conversations summarized in email within 10 minutes. If it isn't written, it didn't happen." He paused like he expected applause. Someone, Jules from Dispatch, let out a tiny laugh that died in his throat when Brent's eyes found him. "This removes ambiguity," Brent said, voice smooth as laminated paper. "Ambiguity is where incompetence hides." I felt my cheeks go hot, not because I'd done anything, but because the whole thing had that trapped animal stillness, like the office was holding its breath. Brent walked the aisle behind our chairs, stopping now and then to point at a monitor or a notebook. "Mina," he said when he reached me, mispronouncing Nina even though my nameplate was right there. "You'll be my test case for adherence. You seem detail-oriented." His mouth twitched like that was either a compliment or a warning. He slid a fresh booklet onto my keyboard, heavy enough to thunk, and added, "I expect strict obedience to the standards, no exceptions." Then kept walking while the pages in front of me sat there like a dare. I took the booklet home like it was contagious, and I didn't want to leave it on my desk overnight. On my couch, with my cat trying to sit on the pages, I read Caldwell Standards cover to cover and felt my brain start doing that slow, irritated hum it does when someone is confidently wrong. It wasn't just be organized, it was rules about rules. All interdepartmental communication must be initiated via ticket form V3. All verbal conversations must be confirmed via summary email within 10 minutes. No employee may deviate from approved phone greeting script. There was a whole section on desk posture visibility that basically boiled down to sit upright so Brent could see you were working. Another section said restroom breaks were fine, but must not interrupt active tasks, which, in logistics, is like saying storms are fine, but must not interrupt weather. The next morning, I watched people pretending not to read as Brent paced with his hands behind his back, like we were on a submarine and he was checking for leaks. Letty wasn't there. She'd been moved to special projects, which is corporate speak for put her in a drawer till she stops being inconvenient. Jules leaned over my divider and murmured, "So, you're the test case? Congrats on being the lab rat." I kept my voice neutral because Brent's hearing seemed freakishly good. "Rules are rules," I said, and Jules' eyebrows lifted like he couldn't tell if I was joking. At 9:17, I had my first quick question from Margot in billing. She walked up holding a stack of invoices and said, "Hey, do you know if the Monroe account?" And I cut in, softer than usual. "Ticket form V3, please." She blinked. It's literally one question. I turned my monitor slightly so Brent could see my hands weren't typing, because apparently that mattered now. "I'm not allowed hallway decisions," I said, and Margot's face did this slow shift from confusion to annoyance like a loading bar. She stalked back to her desk muttering, "We're really doing this." 10 minutes later, a ticket popped into my queue titled Urgent Monroe Thing, and I answered it in 3 sentences, then sent her a summary email about the ticket answer because the booklet said to. My outbox started to look like a ransom note made of subject lines. At 10:03, Brent appeared beside me again and said, "Good, you're demonstrating compliance." His tone made good sound like a test result. He leaned closer, eyes flicking to my inbox, and added, "Starting today, you'll send me a daily adherence report. Every instance you applied standards, with timestamps." He said it like he was giving me a gift, then walked away before I could ask what format he wanted, which meant the format was mine to choose, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard while the rulebook sat open beside my mouse like an instruction manual for a fire alarm. I built the adherence report like it was going to be audited by astronauts. If Brent wanted every instance, I gave him every instance, including the ones that made him look ridiculous. At 11 hour, I opened a fresh spreadsheet, titled it Adherence Log, Nina K, and started tracking my day like a flight recorder. 09.17, requested ticket form V3 from Margot, billing in lieu of hallway decision. 09.28, responded to ticket, Mark 1842. 09.29, sent summary email, ticket number 1842, per standard, 0.1. 09.33, used approved phone greeting script. "Good morning, operations. This is Nina speaking. How may I direct your request?" Even though the caller was literally my coworker, Priya, calling from 2 desks away to ask if the copier had jammed again. I added columns for standard referenced and witnesses present because he loved the idea of witnesses. By lunch, I'd logged 62 entries and my wrist hurt from how often I had to look at the clock. Jules slid a granola bar onto my desk like I was a hostage. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded without looking up because Brent was doing his slow patrol and my desk posture visibility was, apparently, a KPI now. At 1:07, Brent appeared and said, "Send me the report at end of day. PDF." "Noted," I said, and because Standard 2.3 said all verbal instructions must be confirmed, I immediately sent him a summary email. Per our conversation at 13:07, you requested daily adherence report be delivered EOD in PDF format. I watched the little scent swoosh and felt something sharp and clean settle behind my ribs. He replied 1 minute later, "Unnecessary." Which was funny because the booklet didn't care what he thought was unnecessary. I logged it anyway. 13:08, sent summary email to manager formatting instruction. 13:09, manager responded, "Unnecessary." Verbal tone, irritated. Then the tickets started multiplying. People who used to walk over with a question now had to open a form, attach screenshots, choose categories from drop-downs that didn't fit, then wait. Dispatch got backed up, billing got snippy. Priya muttered, "I'm going to start ticketing my own thoughts." At 2:40, a driver named Omar called, frantic because the warehouse in Neukölln wouldn't release his load without a revised BOL, and the client was already screaming. Normally, I would have called the warehouse supervisor directly, smoothed it out, emailed the client, done. Instead, I opened Ticket Form V3 for External Partner Urgent, because all requests go through tickets. And then I couldn't call the supervisor until the ticket generated a reference number, because the booklet also said, "No action taken without reference." Omar stayed on the line breathing hard, saying, "Please, Schwester, they're going to make me wait here all night." And I had to recite the approved greeting again when the system forced a call transfer. The ticket wheel spun, the printer in the corner started its dying animal screech, and somewhere behind me Brent said too loudly, "See, process prevents panic," right as my screen froze with the loading circle stuck in place, like it had decided to take a break too. My screen stayed frozen long enough for Omar to go from frantic to quiet, which is worse because quiet means he's doing math on his own misery. "Nina," he said, like he wasn't sure I was still there. I tried Ctrl+Alt+Del. Nothing. The ticket system's loading circle just sat like a smug little halo. Behind me, Brent said, "No improvising. Wait for the reference." I turned in my chair slowly and asked, "Standard 4.6 says, active tasks must not be interrupted. Is waiting while the system crashes considered an interruption or compliance?" His eyes narrowed, like he hated that I'd read it. "It's compliance," he snapped. I rotated back, put Omar on a scripted hold, because even holds had a script, and stared at the frozen screen while the warehouse clock kept moving without me. When it finally unfroze, the ticket had generated a reference number, stamped 2:47, 7 minutes after I'd started. I called the supervisor at Neukölln, got told, "Send the revised BOL now or he doesn't move." And I emailed it, copied the client, copied Omar, then, per standards, sent a summary email about the phone call to the supervisor, plus a summary email about my summary email. Omar texted me a photo of his dashboard clock at 3:11 with the caption, "Still waiting." Brent hovered like he could physically squeeze the timeline back into shape. At 3:20, the client called and didn't bother with hello. "We're paying you people to move freight, not write love letters to yourselves." I opened Ticket Form V3 for client complaint, because that was literally the listed category. And while I was entering their words verbatim, the client heard my keyboard and said, "Are you taking notes instead of fixing it?" I answered with the approved greeting script again because it was technically a new call transfer, and I heard her inhale like she was about to throw her phone. 10 minutes later, Brent forwarded my summary email back to me with one line. "Too detailed." I stared at it until my eyes watered, then replied with the standards wording pasted beneath his comment. All verbal conversations summarized in email within 10 minutes include decision points and action items. I logged his feedback as manager instruction conflicting with Standard 2.1 because my adherence sheet had a column for conflict, and once you put the word conflict in a spreadsheet, it starts feeling real. At 4:05, I'd broadcasted that Ticket Form V3 had intermittent latency, and the whole office groaned. Jules whispered, "So now we're all going to drown because he made you practice drowning in advance." Brent clapped his hands once, sharp, and said, "No complaining, document issues through tickets," and a few heads turned toward the ticket system like it was a burning building with a suggestion box bolted to the door. By the next morning, the ticket queue looked like a clogged sink. Requests that used to be a 2-minute swivel chair conversation were now sitting in new with angry red timers beside them, and people started treating me like I'd personally invented Brent. Margot in billing marched past my desk and said, not quietly, "Ticket Form V3 is my new therapist because it's the only one who listens." Priya had 2 screens up. One for actual work, one for the ticket portal, like she was running air traffic control for bureaucracy. Brent loved it. He stood near the printer, arms folded, watching the backlog climb, and said, "This is what accountability looks like before it becomes efficient." Jules whispered, "This is what a fire looks like before it becomes a bonfire," then shut up when Brent's head angled in our direction. At 10:12, Brent leaned over my chair and said, "I need you to call the Monroe client now and calm them down." The old me would have said sure and dialed. The Caldwell Standards version of me turned my screen a fraction so he could see the ticket system and asked, "Ticket reference?" His jaw tightened. "This is management direction." "Standards say no action without reference," I said, and it wasn't snarky, just flat, like reading a label. He stared at me like I'd betrayed him in a language he didn't speak. "Fine," he said, clipped, and walked back to his glass-walled office. 3 minutes later, a ticket landed in my queue. Action required. Call Monroe. Manager directive. I accepted it, logged it, called the client with the approved greeting script, and while she ranted, I watched Brent through the glass, pacing with his phone in his hand like he wanted to break something, but had to schedule it first. After the call, I sent my summary email within 10 minutes, copied Brent, copied the ticket, and attached a verbatim transcript of the key decision points because include decision points and action items. Brent replied, "Stop weaponizing the policy." I read that line twice, then opened a new ticket because the booklet had a section called Standards Enforcement Pathway, and under it, report deviations and hostile responses through official channels. Category dropdown, interpersonal conflict. Subcategory, manager conduct. I typed carefully, manager response to compliance included accusatory language, weaponizing, following request for reference number per standard 4.2. I added timestamp, witnesses, Jules, Priya, and attached his email. My finger hovered over submit long enough to feel my pulse in my fingertip. Then I clicked, and the confirmation popped up bright and cheerful. Ticket number 1931 assigned to Brent Caldwell. Ticket number 1931 sat in assigned under Brent's name like a tiny bomb under his desk, and he acted like it didn't exist, which was its own kind of panic. He didn't come out for his usual aisle patrol. He didn't correct anyone's staples. He stayed behind glass, typing with the stiff, violent rhythm of someone trying to delete a mistake from reality. Around 11, Priya messaged me on Teams, "Did you ticket Brent?" And I replied, "Standards enforcement pathway," because saying yes felt too loud. Jules rolled by with his chair and murmured, "You just mailed a live snake to his own address." The thing about Ticket Form V3 is it doesn't care about hierarchy. It routes based on category, and unless someone overrides it, it lands where the rules say it should. At 11:17, my inbox pinged with an automated update. Ticket number 1931 escalated due to potential management conduct and reassigned to HR Shared Services queue. Brent's head snapped up in his office like he'd heard the ping through glass. 5 minutes later, I got an email from him with no greeting, just, "Come to my office. Now." Standard 1.9 said, "No hallway decisions. All meetings must be scheduled with agenda." Standard 2.1 said, "If it isn't written, it didn't happen." So I replied, "Please submit meeting request via calendar invite with agenda per standards 1.9 and 3.2. I watched the sent timestamp appear, and my stomach did a slow, unpleasant roll. He stormed out anyway, walked straight to my desk, and said in a low voice, "We are talking." A few heads lifted. The office got that brittle quiet again. I kept my hands on the keyboard, posture upright, and said, "I'm available when the meeting is scheduled." His face went a shade darker, like someone turned the saturation up. "You're undermining me," he hissed. "I'm following the standards you authored," I said, and it sounded almost polite. He leaned closer, and I could smell his cologne, something crisp and expensive that didn't belong in our toner air. "Withdraw the ticket," he said. "That's not how HR works," I answered, because it isn't. Once it's in the system, it's a record. He glanced around, realized we had witnesses, and snapped louder. "Fine. Sit in meeting room B in 5 minutes." Then he stalked off. I opened my calendar, created an invite titled Per Manager Directive, discussion reticket number 1931, added agenda bullets exactly as the standards required, and invited Brent and myself. Then, because meetings must be summarized, I pre-drafted a blank summary email with the subject line, "Summary Meeting Room B, ticket number 1931, cursor blinking at the top like a metronome." Meeting Room B smelled like stale markers and last week's microwaved soup. Brent shut the door too hard and said, "You think you're clever?" And my finger slid over to the clock app because I had 10 minutes after whatever he said to make it real. Brent didn't sit. He paced along the whiteboard like the room was a courtroom and he owned the gavel. "You're creating a hostile environment," he said, and I almost laughed because he'd printed that phrase into our lives like letterhead. I kept my voice even. "You told me to be strictly obedient. I'm being strictly obedient." He stopped and pointed at me with the capped pen like yesterday's tapping had evolved. "Obedience means doing what I mean, not hiding behind technicalities." I glanced at the wall clock and said, "That's ambiguous. The standards say ambiguity is where incompetence hides." His eyes did a quick flicker. Anger, embarrassment, something close to fear. Then he tried a different angle. "HR doesn't need to be involved. We solve issues in-house." "The ticket escalated automatically," I said. "Ticket form doesn't do in-house." He leaned forward, lowering his voice like we were conspirators. "Withdraw it by marking it resolved. Say it was a misunderstanding." I didn't argue. I opened my laptop, logged in, pulled up ticket number 1931, and read the options aloud because that's what literal obedience looks like when you stop doing people favors. Resolution reasons, completed, duplicate, invalid request, user error. I looked up. Which one are you instructing me to select? The air in the room got thick, like the AC had quit out of solidarity. Brent's jaw worked. Just choose something. I typed slowly, letting him see the screen. Under resolution notes, I wrote, Manager requested ticket withdrawal without identifying correct resolution category. I turned it toward him. Do you approve this wording? He snatched the chair finally and sat, hands flat on the table, trying to look calm while his knee bounced. Stop writing like I'm a criminal. If it isn't written, it didn't happen, I said, and my own heart thumped hard enough I could feel it in my ears. He exhaled through his nose. Fine. Mark it invalid request. That would be untrue, I said. It wasn't invalid. It was a standards conflict. His face went tight and shiny. Nina, do you want to keep this job? The question landed heavy, not shouted, not even dramatic, just dropped like a weight. I stared at him, then at my pre-drafted summary email waiting in my outbox like a trapdoor. Is that a performance discussion? I asked, because standards say those require HR present. For a second, he looked like he might lunge over the table and rip the laptop out of my hands. Instead, he stood abruptly, opened the door, and said, Too bright, get back to work. And as I stepped into the bullpen, my phone buzzed with an automated notification. HR Shared Services has requested a call regarding ticket number 1931. And across the aisle, Jules' eyes widened like he'd just seen the wave finally hit shore. HR's call request sat in my notifications like a blinking hazard light, and Brent pretended it wasn't there by suddenly becoming the busiest man alive. He started firing off tickets to me for things he'd never cared about before. Confirm label font size, reconcile palette count discrepancy, verify greeting compliance reminder sent to team. Each one stamped urgent, each one designed to keep my hands full so my mouth stayed shut. I accepted every ticket, logged every action, and when the HR number finally flashed on my phone at 2:18, I clicked answer with my headset on like I was taking a client escalation. Hi, this is Tessa from HR Shared Services, a woman's voice said, professional but tired, like she'd been cleaning up other people's messes since breakfast. We received an automated escalation tied to a management conduct category. Can you tell me what happened? I glanced at the booklet on my desk, then at the clock, then at Brent's office where he was suddenly very interested in rearranging papers that didn't need rearranging. Per standards, I can provide a written summary, I said, and Tessa made a small noise, half laugh, half sigh. You can, but I need a quick understanding first, she said. Was there retaliation? Threats? The word retaliation made my skin prickle because it framed the last hour in a way I'd been refusing to name. He asked me to withdraw the ticket, I said, and kept it plain. He said I was weaponizing policy. He requested an unscheduled meeting, then implied job security consequences when I wouldn't mislabel the ticket as invalid. I heard keys clicking on her end. Do you have documentation? Yes, I said, and my inbox felt heavier just thinking about it. Emails, calendar invite, ticket history, and I drafted a meeting summary. Send everything, Tessa said, and her tone sharpened like she'd finally found the seam she needed. Include the standards booklet if it's relevant. I almost smiled at that, because the booklet was the weapon, but not the way Brent meant. It's authored by him, I said. It's very relevant. When I hung up, my hands shook slightly, the kind of shake that comes after you've acted calm for too long. Jules rolled his chair over and murmured, You just handed HR the keys to his little kingdom. Priya didn't look up from her screen, just said, Careful, men like him don't lose. They rewrite. At 3:04, Brent emerged and announced to the floor, loud enough for everyone. Starting immediately, all outbound client emails must be approved by me before sending. He looked straight at me when he said it, like the rule was a collar. I opened the booklet, flipped until I found it, and read the line back in my head. All approvals must be returned within 20 minutes to avoid process interruption. I created a ticket titled Outbound Approval SLA Tracking, attached the standard as a screenshot, and sent Brent the first approval request for a routine status update, then started the timer as he shut his office door a little too softly. Brent didn't respond to the approval ticket for 19 minutes, and I watched the countdown like it was a heart monitor. At 18 minutes, I sent him a courtesy ping through the ticket comments because the standards actually had a line about proactive nudges to prevent downstream blockage, which sounded like something he wrote after reading a productivity blog at 2 a.m. At 20 minutes, nothing. The system auto-flagged the ticket amber. SLA breach risk. At 23 minutes, it flipped red and generated an alert email to my manager, meaning Brent got an email notifying Brent that Brent missed his own deadline. I didn't have to do anything except keep breathing normally while my inbox filled with the most passive-aggressive robot language on earth. At 24 minutes, his door opened and he walked out holding his phone like it had offended him. Why am I getting spammed? He snapped, loud enough that Margot lifted her head like a meerkat. I kept my eyes on my screen. Because approvals must be returned within 20 minutes to avoid process interruption, I said, and I made it sound like weather. That's not what I meant, he said. I'm in meetings. I can't be chained to your little timers. They're your timers, Jules muttered under his breath, and I pretended not to hear it because I didn't want to have to log it as a witness statement. Brent leaned in, voice tight. From now on, you send approvals in batches, twice a day. I opened the booklet, flipped to the approvals section and asked, "Can you point to where batching is allowed?" His nostrils flared. "Do you want the work done or not?" "I want it done per standards," I said, and the word per felt like I was tapping a nail into wood. He stared at me a beat too long, then said, "Fine, I'll approve," and stalked back into his office, where I heard the distinct sound of him slapping keys like they were misbehaving. 30 seconds later, he approved the status update with a one-word comment, "Send." I sent it, then, because I'm apparently living inside a loop, sent the summary email documenting that he approved it late, including the automated SLA breach stamp. The next approval request was for a client named Hellinger who always demanded confirmation of trailer seals before release. Routine, except Brent didn't open it. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. At 4:36, the warehouse called asking why we hadn't confirmed. I said, "Approval pending," and the supervisor laughed once, sharp. "Approval from who? The Pope?" At 4:48, Hellinger's procurement guy emailed me in all caps about incompetence, and my phone buzzed with the driver's text. "They won't let me out." Brent finally replied at 5:03 with "approved" and added, "Next time, don't wait." I stared at that sentence until my hands stopped trembling. Then I opened ticket form V3 and created a new one. Process interruption caused by approval delay. Documentation, attaching every timestamp, every alert, every client message, and I routed it to the only place the standard said process failures belonged, which meant the system started asking HR for another call while Brent's office light was still on. The second HR escalation hit Brent like a silent alarm. You could tell because he stopped sending tickets for an hour, which in our world was basically a power outage. At 9:06 the next morning, he called another all-hands, except this time it was just our team, doors closed, blinds half drawn like we were about to watch a training video nobody asked for. "We have to tighten communication," he said, smiling with his mouth only. "Certain individuals are confusing process with obstruction." His eyes landed on me, then slid away fast, like looking too long would make it real. He handed out an addendum sheet. One page, freshly printed, still warm. "Effective immediately," he said. "No employee may create tickets categorized as management conduct without prior managerial review." Priya's pen froze midair. Jules actually snorted, tried to cough it into something polite. I raised my hand. Brent's smile twitched. "Yes, Mina." "Nina," I corrected automatically, then held up the addendum. "This contradicts your standards enforcement pathway. Also, it creates a circular approval requirement," I said, keeping my tone calm because calm was my only armor. "If the subject of a report must approve the report can't be submitted." Brent's cheeks flushed, but he didn't back down. "That's why it's an addendum," he said, "to clarify intent." "Standards say intent is ambiguous," Jules murmured, and I caught the tiniest flash of panic in Brent's eyes because Jules wasn't a lab rat. He was just a guy with nothing left to lose in dispatch. Brent tapped the addendum with his pen. "Sign it," he said. "Acknowledgement of receipt." He slid the clipboard toward me first like it was a dare. I read the bottom line. "Non-compliance may result in corrective action." I signed acknowledged receipt because that's what it said, not agreed, then immediately emailed myself a photo of the page, timestamp visible, and forwarded it to HR with the subject, "Manager issued addendum potentially restricting reporting." Brent must have realized what I was doing because he swooped in at my desk 20 minutes later, voice low. "Stop escalating," he said. "You're making the team look unstable." "I'm following documentation standards," I replied, and my hands kept moving, steady, like I was assembling something delicate. He stared, then said, "Fine. New rule. All emails to HR require me CC'd." He said it confidently, like that was normal, like HR belonged to him. I opened the booklet again and asked, "Can you show me where HR communications require managerial visibility?" He didn't answer. He just walked back to his office, and 5 minutes later a calendar invite appeared from him. "Performance alignment, Nina K. No agenda, no HR, scheduled for 4:30, 30 minutes after my shift ends," and the invite note read, "Mandatory." I stared at the performance alignment invite like it was a parking ticket tucked under my wiper. Annoying, threatening, and technically optional if you wanted to pretend laws weren't real. It was scheduled for 4:30 p.m., meeting room C, no agenda, no HR, and the note mandatory, like he could just declare gravity. At 4:12, I replied to the invite with, "Agenda required per standards 3.2. Performance discussions require HR present per standards 5.4. Then I forwarded the whole thing to Tessa with a simple FYI. At 4:19, Brent came out of his office with that controlled stride he did when he wanted to look calm, but wasn't, and he stopped at my desk without even pretending to care who could hear. "You don't get to summon HR," he said. "You're not management." "I'm not summoning," I answered. "I'm complying. Standards say HR must be present." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "If you walk into that room with HR, you'll regret it." My hands went cold on the mouse. "Is that a directive?" I asked, because that's what literal obedience turns fear into. Paperwork. His eyes flicked to my screen where the standards PDF was open like a shield. "Go," he said sharply, and walked ahead of me like he wanted to lead the narrative. Meeting room C had the weird cinnamon smell of cheap air freshener trying to cover old stress. Brent sat at the far end of the table, arms folded, and started talking before I even pulled my chair out. Your attitude is disruptive, he said. Your constant emails, your escalation. Agenda? I asked, and held my notebook open on a blank page with the time written at the top. He blinked, like the word annoyed him. The agenda is your performance, he said. My phone buzzed on the table. A calendar invite popped up from HR Shared Services titled Join Performance Alignment Nina K. Attendees, me, Brent, Tessa. Brent's face went tight like someone had cinched a strap around his head. Cancel that, he hissed. I can't, I said, and slid the phone slightly so he could see the invite. It was added to ensure compliance. The door handle turned a second later, and Tessa stepped in holding a laptop and a small folder like she'd done this exact walk 100 times. Brent's expression didn't change, but his posture did. Shoulders back, chin up, corporate mask clicking into place. This is unnecessary, he said, and Tessa smiled politely in a way that didn't reach her eyes as she asked, Can we start with the written agenda you sent, Brent? And his mouth opened once, closed, then opened again as my notebook pen hovered over the page, waiting to make everything real. Tessa opened her laptop, clicked once, and said, Brent, per your company handbook, performance conversations require documented expectations, examples, and a chance for the employee to respond. You requested this meeting, so you should have that prepared. Brent's smile stayed on like a sticker that wouldn't peel. Of course, he said, then looked at me like I'd forced him to forget how to read. He slid a thin stack of papers across the table. The top page said, Behavioral Alignment Notes, and underneath were 3 bullet points that could have described a haunted Roomba. Over-communication, process rigidity, failure to demonstrate flexibility. I pointed my pen at the list. These are subjective, I said. The standards define flexibility as a risk factor. I've been following your written standards. Brent's jaw clicked. That's exactly the problem, he snapped, then caught himself and added softer. You're using them as a shield. Tessa's eyes moved from him to me, then back. Brent, she said, standards were implemented by you as a management tool. If adherence is now a performance issue, we need to clarify which standards are being revised and why. Brent exhaled sharply. Because she's creating disruption, he said, and his voice rose despite the corporate mask. She ticketed me. She's escalating every little thing. People are scared to talk because she's logging timestamps like a surveillance camera. I didn't even flinch. I opened my notebook and read back one of his earlier lines verbatim. If it isn't written, it didn't happen, I said. That was your instruction in front of the team. Brent's face flushed, and he looked at Tessa like she should shut that down. Tessa just typed. Do you have examples of policy being followed incorrectly? She asked. Brent leaned forward. She delayed a client call waiting for a ticket reference. I nodded. Standard 4.2, no action without reference, I said, and slid my printed adherence log across the table with the timestamp and the system outage notice attached. Ticket form latency delayed us 7 minutes. I documented it. I complied. Brent's hands tightened on the paper. So you admit you let a driver sit? He said, and there it was, trying to turn compliance into negligence. Tessa's voice stayed calm but edged. Brent, did you instruct employees to proceed without references during outages? Brent hesitated half a beat too long. No, he said, and his eyes flicked to mine, warning and pleading at the same time, while my phone buzzed again with a fresh ticket form notification from outside the room. Priority. Approval request pending. Slay 12 minutes remaining. The ticket form notification buzzed again, louder this time because my watch decided urgency was a lifestyle. I didn't even look at it at first. I just watched Brent clock the vibration on my wrist, like he could feel the timer too. We're in a meeting, he said, sharp. Turn that off. Tessa lifted her eyes. It's work-related? She asked. I nodded. Outbound approval SLA, I said. Per standards, it can't be ignored without documenting the interruption. Brent's laugh came out like air through teeth. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, gesturing at my wrist like the watch was my accomplice. Tessa held up a hand. Let her check it, she said, and Brent's face tightened at being told no in his own meeting. I opened the ticket on my phone. Client. Hellinger. Subject. Seal confirmation. Status. Waiting approval. Timer. 9 minutes. Brent stared at it, then leaned back and said, Send it. Approved. I kept my voice neutral. Approval must be recorded in the ticket comments, I said. Can you comment approved on ticket number 2017? He looked at Tessa like, Can you believe her? And Tessa just waited. Brent's fingers moved on his phone with angry precision. A second later, the ticket updated. Approved. Brent Caldwell. I sent the email immediately, then wrote in my notebook, 1643, approval received during HR meeting, action taken within SLA. Tessa asked, Brent, do you see the conflict here? Your standards create operational risk if you're the bottleneck. Brent's tone turned syrupy. We can adjust, he said. The issue is her. She's not a team player. Jules' face flashed in my mind, his muttered snake comment, his quiet solidarity, and I felt a hot, tired anger under my ribs. A team player would have had the team's input before imposing rules that freeze basic communication, I said, and my voice was still calm, but it landed heavier than I expected. Brent snapped, Don't lecture me. Tessa's mouth pressed into a line. Brent, she said. You issued an addendum restricting reporting of management conduct. That's not acceptable. Brent's eyes flicked to mine again, that quick warning. It was to prevent misuse, he said. She's targeting me. Tessa's fingers paused over her keyboard. Then we investigate with evidence, she said. And until that's complete, you will not make unilateral changes to reporting channels. Brent's nostrils flared. So she wins, he said, and there was something raw in it, like he couldn't stand the idea of an employee affecting his narrative. Tessa didn't bite. This isn't about winning, she said. It's about compliance and safety. Brent stood abruptly, chair scraping, and said, Fine, I'm done here. Then walked out without waiting, leaving the door swinging slightly open, the cinnamon air freshener suddenly too sweet, and my phone buzzing with a new email from corporate titled Notice Process Audit Initiated Ops Team. The Process Audit Initiated email had that cheerful corporate tone, like it was inviting us to a bake sale instead of a public hanging. It listed dates, scope, and random sampling of communications, which made my adherence log feel less like a coping mechanism and more like a spine. Brent came back from his dramatic exit 10 minutes later, acting as if he'd simply stepped out for water. He stood in the bullpen and said, Everyone, please remain calm. Audits are routine. But his voice was too bright, too controlled, like he was trying to iron fear flat. Margot whispered, Routine my ass, and Priya's hands hovered over her keyboard like she expected it to bite. Brent's first move was to lock things down. He sent a team-wide message. Effective immediately. No one communicates with auditors without me present. Then he followed it with, All documentation requests must be routed through my office. It hit the floor like a fog. People stopped talking. Even the printer sounded quieter, like it was listening. I opened the Caldwell Standards and found the line about audits, because yes, he'd written one. Employees shall respond to official inquiries truthfully and promptly. Management may provide context, but shall not obstruct. I forwarded that line to myself and started a new adherence entry. At 1:32, an auditor named Ralph emailed me directly asking for a sample of ticket-to-email workflows involving client escalations. Brent saw the email notification pop on my screen and walked over so fast his chair wheels squeaked. Forward that to me, he said. I'll handle it. I turned slightly, keeping my monitor visible, and asked, Are you instructing me to delay a direct auditor request? His lips pressed together. I'm instructing you to follow chain of command. Standards say respond promptly, I said, and my voice stayed steady even as my stomach flipped. He leaned in, low and dangerous. If you answer him without me, you're insubordinate. The word insubordinate hit old nerves, the ones trained to keep peace, to not make a scene. My watch buzzed with a 10-minute summary email reminder for this exact interaction because I'd set it as a recurring timer like a lunatic. I looked at Brent and said, Then put that directive in writing, because if he wanted my obedience, he could own it. His eyes flickered. Don't play games, he said. I opened a blank email addressed to him and typed, Confirming, you are directing me not to respond to Auditor Ralph's inquiry without you present. This may delay prompt response. Then hovered over send. Brent's hand lifted as if to stop me, then dropped. Fine, he snapped. Do what you want. I sent the email anyway, then replied to Ralph. Acknowledged. Compiling sample now will provide by 15 bow, and attached 3 ticket histories showing approval delays, SLA breaches, and Brent's own next time don't wait. My fingers didn't shake until after I hit send, and across the office Jules exhaled a quiet, appreciative wow, like he'd been holding it for weeks. The audit moved fast after that, the way things move when someone upstairs realizes they've been signing off on a liability. By Thursday morning, Ralph and a second auditor were doing quiet desk-side interviews, not in a dramatic lineup way, more like they'd stroll up with a tablet and say, Can you walk me through how you'd handle a driver detained at a warehouse? While you tried not to look like you were auditioning for unemployment. Brent shadowed them at first, hovering too close, providing context, but after lunch his calendar suddenly filled with executive sync and stakeholder alignment, and the hovering stopped. People started speaking in normal tones again, cautiously, like animals testing if the trap is still set. Margot told Ralph, with the flat rage of someone who reconciles numbers for a living, We used to solve issues in 5 minutes. Now we spend 20 proving we're allowed to solve them. Priya showed him a screenshot of the addendum and said, He made us sign it. And Ralph's mouth did a small, tight movement, like he'd tasted something sour. I kept doing the same thing I'd done all month, literal, time-stamped obedience. If an auditor asked for something, I responded promptly and documented that I did. If Brent gave a directive, I asked for it in writing and documented the response. It sounds petty, but it felt like the only language he respected, paper. Friday at 16:10, Tessa pinged me. Can you join a brief call? Confidential. My pulse thudded once, then leveled out. On the call were Tessa, someone from legal, and a quiet woman who introduced herself as interim ops lead. No Brent. The interim lead said, Effective immediately, Brent Caldwell is removed from supervisory duties pending outcome of the audit, like she was reading a weather report, and I realized my shoulders had been living up by my ears for weeks because they dropped hard enough to ache. Tessa added, We're implementing a temporary freeze on the Caldwell standards. Return to prior workflow while we review. The word freeze sounded almost funny after all that obsession with control. When I hung up, the bullpen felt brighter even though the lights hadn't changed. Jules rolled by and whispered, "So, did your robot obedience break the robot maker?" And I didn't answer right away because my throat had that tight, held-back feeling that wasn't exactly triumph. Brent walked out of his office at 1647 carrying his standing desk water bottle and a slim laptop bag. Jaw clenched, eyes aimed straight ahead like the carpet owed him money. He didn't look at anyone until he reached my desk, and then he paused, just long enough for me to feel the heat of his attention. "Enjoy the chaos," he said quietly, like a curse. I turned my screen a fraction so it showed the old shared chat window reopened, people asking quick questions like humans again, and I said, just as quietly, "I'm following process." And his mouth tightened. Then he kept walking, glass door clicking shut behind him while my inbox filled with the first normal, unscripted message I'd seen in weeks. "Hey Nina, quick question, you free?"